and welcome to Design Career Network's Get That UX Job. Tonight, we have a very special treat for you. We have Andy Welfle, who is the Senior Content Strategy Manager at Adobe. And Andy also wrote the book, Writing Equals Designing, Writing is Designing. And tonight we'll learn all about the field of UX content strategy, or we'll call it UX content design, or UX writing, depending on who's writing the job requirements. And before we get started, I'd just like to introduce myself. I'm Andy Galpern. I'm the founder of Design Career Network, which is also part of Cascade SF is a part of Design Career Network. And we are an experience design organization dedicated to helping designers grow in their careers, advance, learn new skills, and explore new opportunities. So we also we do shows about UX, different types of job opportunities and fields and roles. We also do shows about emerging technology and the future of design, so you know where to, so basically your work is sustainable. And with that in mind, I'd like to introduce you to Mr. Andy Welfle.
Hello, Andy.
Hi, Andy.
Hello.
Oh yeah, by the way,
Too many Andys.
It's an Andy night tonight.
Yeah.
Andy. I phonetically.
That's an Andy extravaganza.
It's an Andy extravaganza. And okay, we'll stop. Anyway, thank you, Andy, for speaking tonight. Just a disclaimer: Andy and I worked in the same building at Adobe. I worked at Adobe as a consultant for a while, and I was a content strategist, and I got to attend his meetings. And he's so informative, so full of like useful information. And I was like, okay, I can't wait for Andy to give a talk and participate and share his knowledge, especially after you published that book, the co-authored the book, Writing is Designing. I know you have a little, here we got to show it. Bling! There we go. wait, you covered the title.
Oh, yeah. Writing is Designing Words in the User Experience by my co-author, Michael Metz. Yeah.
But Michael Metz and Andy. Yeah. This book is awesome, and we'll put it in the show notes of where you can buy it. But before that happens, Andy is going to give you a lot of information about UX content strategy, and
get ready.
And I'm gonna hide for a bit, and then we'll open it up for audience Q&A after his presentation. So thank you all for being here tonight. If you like this video, like and subscribe, thumbs up, hit the little bell. All right.
Smash that heart.
Smash the heart. Yeah. All right. Smash that heart. Okay. I'm going. Here you go.
Cool. Awesome. Hey, everybody. Thank you for watching my talk. Cool. There is my screen. I see it now. All right. I'm going to be talking to y'all about writing is designing for about a half an hour-ish. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what I mean when I say that, and then also talk a little bit about getting jobs in this field. So first, a quick introduction. I'm Andy. I'm a UX content strategy manager at Adobe in San Francisco. I co-authored this book from Rosenfeld Media called Writing is Designing, which came out in January 2020. Cancel all of my in-person book tour events to do all online. That was interesting and fun. And I use he, him pronouns. So before we get into this, I really didn't think I could continue without taking a moment to acknowledge the tragedy in the Asian American Pacific Islander communities. Not just the racially motivated, horrible murder of 8 people, 6 of them who are women of Asian descent, but the racist violence against elders in the last few months, like the 2 who were attacked in broad daylight on Market Street in San Francisco yesterday. So let's just take a couple minutes, seconds to stop and reflect on the impact of the community from that. Cool. So also, because I know that, intent does not equal impact, I hope that you will donate as I have to Stop AAPI Hate, which is a leading organization in the fight against racism. So here's the website you can go to, stopaapihate.org. This is very important right now. Let's get into this a little bit. Let's talk about what I mean when I say writing is designing, and then And then answer the question, what exactly is it that I do around here, Bill? And yeah, I'll try to take that. This talk is a mashup of about 3 different talks that I do with a little bit of new content. So I want to apologize if I lose track of the narrative or move around a little bit. I've practiced as I always do, but this is pretty new to me. So first, writing is designing. That is the mantra of my book, of my career, of kind of my life thesis statement, and I want to bring you along on the ride with me. And one way that I really like to kind of like open that thought exercise is by showing an app interface, right? So this is from DoorDash. This is a pretty popular food delivery app that's been out there. There's a million of other apps like this too, and a really interesting way to see this and to look at it is just take out all the words, right? What are you left with? Not much, right? Like you have a really cool brand illustration there on what looks like a title screen, right? You have something that involves like some star ratings, and you think maybe there's a list right there, but it's not really very usable. And then you have like some kind of a map screen, right? Like not quite sure what to do with that. So this is just to show that, like, when you remove the words from a design, it becomes unusable in many circumstances. And in fact, just as if you remove the design from the words, right, it's not super usable. I'd argue, like, without the words, even more of this is not usable. So when you have somebody who is contributing the words to an interface, they are teaming up the writing portion and the designing portion of their brain to work together. I think a lot of people see writing and designing as sort of like opposites, but they work really well together. There is a content strategist named Nicole Fenton who is brilliant, hugely influential in my work. She wrote a book called Nicely Said with Kate Kiefer-Lee about brand voice. And she had this blog post from a few years ago that says this: I work on digital products and physical goods, so I'm deeply involved in the design process. But I also want to call out early that my process is the design process. I don't write fiction or short stories. I use language to solve problems, whether that's behind the scenes in the product itself, behind the scenes or in the product itself. I use words as material. And that's huge. That is exactly what I'm talking about. So what does that mean in action, right? So if somebody comes to you, like they often come to me and they say, Andy, I have this button. What should that button say? And so, okay, so I think about this. Apologize also for the very Benadryl brand going on here. So the writer side of my brain asks, what are the right words to make this button clear, right? Like, is it done? Is it continue? Is it finished? Is it complete? If it's a completion flow, like what are the words? The designer side of my brain comes in, and we're like, wait, stop. What are the entry and exit points? How do you get to this button? Where do you go after you're done with this button? What action immediately follows pressing this button? Are we using the right messaging component here in the first place? Should it be a button? Should it be a dialogue? Should it be a toast? Should it be an inline link? What's the inverse action here? Like, if it's follow, is it unfollow? If it's complete, is it incomplete? How does this translate or localize? Adobe products translate into 30 to 50 different languages. Is this going to translate well? And does it fit within our larger voice and tone strategy? Are we going to say something that just does not sound like us fundamentally? So if these things sound familiar to you as a designer, yeah, that is because there's a lot of design involved, right? So all this to say is we can't think about this in isolation. We have to really consider the larger context and the pieces around it. So writing is about fitting words together. Designing is about solving problems for your users. So this is to say we design with words. So there's a really, really great book, old book called The Elements of User Experience by Jesse James Garrett. And this is something that I was referred to by my friend and mentor, Jonathan Coleman. If anybody knows him, he's a content strategist / product designer in Intercom in Dublin. But he used to work with me at Facebook a long time ago. So basically in this book, the idea is that there are different layers of UX, and they start from a very abstract base, and you start to build layers on top of each other, and that's how you get your user experience. So, you have your strategy layer, which is the reason we're creating something. You have a scoping layer where you're, working to plan functional requirements. You're thinking about the system. Jesse James Garrett calls it the skeleton and the structure layers, but I'm going to simplify it into systems for this. That's kind of how the system behaves and how users interact with the thing. And then you have the surface layer, the Chrome, right? How the thing will look and feel and sound. So along the way, you have different deliverables from both what I'm going to call, just for this exercise, a more visual designer, what we would call a product designer or a UX designer, and then the content designer. So at that very base level, when you're thinking about strategy, designers are thinking about how the thing will behave and look and feel, and content strategists are thinking about creating and planning and managing content. Typically, they both together are thinking about the timelines and the deliverables and the roadmaps, things like that. When you get to the system level layer, which I think is where many of us operate in, designers are thinking about component documentation, patterns, design system stuff. We're thinking about style guide stuff, grammar mechanics of the words, content patterns, terminology that you use, things like that. And then you have that surface layer where designers are thinking about what we at Adobe often call the screens, right? Like the XD files, the Figma files, the components, the workflows, that stuff. UX writers are thinking about microcopy and buttons and dialogues and errors and stuff like that. So we work together and have kind of analogs at every stage along that journey. So if words are such an important part of design, why do we think of design in terms of visual tools a lot? Right? We're always talking about proficiency with Figma and with Sketch and with XD and with Photoshop and with Illustrator and all of these very visual tools. We don't think of like text editors as a design tool. But should I use Sketch or Figma or Adobe XD to design an interface like in a Google Home? Right? Like, what do I need to design this? I have designed interfaces with these kind of products using a plain text editor, right? Like that is often what I'll use, at least to kind of like start thinking about this stuff. So all that being said, like we shouldn't worry too much about like the tools that we use in our particular outputs because we're all focused on, producing a thing. So this is something that my co-author Michael Metz says a lot. Don't mistake making a deliverable with making a difference, and that's what we're kind of trying to solve here. So I'm going to switch track a little bit. I'm going to get into what a content designer does, and do you really want to be one? I will say this as an aside. I know that my friend Johnny Gamber is in the chat here. He and I and another collaborator have a podcast about pencils. Michael Metz also really likes pencils. So this is a Japanese Mitsubishi 9800 pencil, and they have this quote written on the side of it, "Made by elaborate process," and it is one of my favorite. Like if I might have to get a tattoo of this quote. It's so good. Made by elaborate process, which is very much what we as content designers are. So before we jump into some specifics about that, I'll tell you a little bit about my journey. So growing up in high school and college, all I really wanted to do was to be a writer, right? So in my current job, I use words as design material, but I didn't really think of it that way. I saw design as drawings and art. I certainly did not go to art school, but I love art and design. It's always been just an interest of mine and a passion. I've done some, looking back, pretty terrible graphic design along the way. I had a career trajectory that took me from getting an English Lit degree with a journalism minor in 2006. I really wanted to work at a newspaper. I worked at a newspaper in the time when it was not a good idea to get in newspapers. They were laying off people. It was not a growing industry. So I worked there part-time for a little while, and eventually I needed full-time work. So I landed on arts nonprofit. I had a nonprofit in Fort Wayne, Indiana, where I grew up. That needed a marketing and operations director, and that was something that interested me, and I jumped into that. So I worked there at that time when Twitter and Facebook started to become tools that businesses would use, right? So like Facebook pages came into being, and businesses started using Twitter, and that really interested me. So I kind of pivoted and specialized a little bit. I got into social media marketing, and eventually I went to go work as a community manager at an e-commerce company, pencils.com. And so, which founded the Blackwing, which the modern day Blackwing, which is a really nice pencil. Anyhow, we're not here to talk about pencils. So I worked there. I really loved the community building aspect of it. I really loved the tools, but I realized I really didn't love kind of the promotional and sales aspect of what I was doing. So that took me to a job at a web agency to research design in Fort Wayne, Indiana, which is a web development company. And I worked with clients who we built websites for on their social media strategy. So I basically told them why they should use Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn, et cetera. Really love the communication and the strategy and kind of the client services portion of that. But I realized I really, really wanted to get down into the weeds and actually apply these skills toward building something instead of just, how to use something, kind of instructional design. So that led me to discover something called web content strategy or content strategy. For a while, I did not have the words for doing this. It wasn't until I read Elements of Content Strategy by Aaron Kassane, which is an amazing book. It's free online if you want to read it. And Content Strategy on the Web by Christina Halverson, who is the mother of content strategy. So I read those things, really, really identified with it, loved it, started digging into it, and pretty soon realized I wanted to move to maybe a different, bigger market. So I connected at one point on Twitter with Jonathan Coleman, who I talked about earlier, a friend of mine, and he was like, "Hey, I work at Facebook. We're hiring. You should apply." I was like, "Yeah, sure, whatever." They're going to pick some rando from Indiana to come work there. They did. Moved out to the Bay Area in 2014. Worked at Facebook for a couple of years and loved it. Worked with a really great team. The team is huge, right? Like I started when it was 30 people. In 2017, I left when it was 100 people. Now they're like 500 people. Quite something. And the reason I left was to come start a practice at Adobe. We had an opportunity to build a content strategy, content design team here from scratch within the design org, and I really wanted to jump on that. So that led me to that. And along the way, I've had little hobbies. I love blogging. I have a podcast about pencils. I do some community building. I make a zine, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. And of course, that kind of led to writing a book. So what do all these things have in common? Right. So over the years, I've thought about this a lot, and I realized I really love creating order from chaos using language. I really love writing words that are simple and human and helpful, kind of keyword on the helpful. And I love supporting artists and facilitating creativity. And I really love building and participating in communities centered around a passion, like this one. So thank you, Andy, for building this community. And I would venture to guess that a lot of other content designers in the world also feel this particular way. I do want to talk about something that Andy Welfle alluded to earlier. There's so many titles, right? Some of us, sometimes we're UX writers, we're product writers, we're content designers, we're content strategists, we're UX content strategists. What's up with all these titles? What do they mean? For that, I turned to my friend Scott Kuby, who is a brilliant content strategist currently working at MailChimp. And well, I guess even before I get to that, I want to mention, recently there's been a huge shift from two very large content strategy teams from Shopify and Facebook to rebrand to content design. So this is part of what, like, the kind of renewed conversation about what these what these terms mean. So this is something that's kind of happened recently that's interesting. Last fall, last winter. So anyhow, Scott Kuby, really interesting guy. He took a stab at like trying to map out and make sense of these words that we're using and kind of like make a place. And I really love the way that he does this. So I'm going to really briefly break this down for you. This is from one of his presentations. He was kind enough to, with permission, allow me to use these slides. So he really sees two axes that you can kind of like plot this on, right? There's the, what is it? X axis that goes this way. I always get that confused. The business versus design axis. So one way that he sees it is, what are you like? How are you organized? What kind of goals are you working on? What kind of problems, right? Like, are you working on business problems? Sales and growth and retention? Are you working on design problems? This is painting with a very broad brush, thinking about usability and UX and user goals, things like that. And then you have this other axis, the Y axis, which is, are you tactically doing the writing, or are you more strategically working like on operations and infrastructure? And he's kind of like plotted out these different titles to that, right? Like, a UX writer is very tactical, doing the writing that has a very sort of like design goal accomplishing role. You have a content designer who is also kind of in that quadrant, but maybe a little bit more toward the business end and a little bit more toward the ops and infrastructure end. You have content strategists who are very much geared toward the user, but are working, like doing more kind of strategic operations and infrastructural things as a staff content strategist, where you have consultant content strategists like he used to be, who are entirely toward the business end, right? Talking to executives about content and why it matters. And there's lots of other like information architects and marketing writers and technical writers that all kind of fit into that same structure. I love using this. This is a really good way to sort of like explain it and understand it. Scott certainly knows that there's a lot of people who disagree with this. That's okay. What does design mean? Can't even agree what design means. Are we doing writing? What the heck is a UX writer? Well, I'm not just a writer, et cetera, et cetera. So the thing that he says that I really, really agree with, it's all made up, right? If you're a content strategist, you can be a content strategist. If you're a designer, you should be content designer. You should be a designer. Whatever. We all just make this up. The more important things, and this is from an article that Scott wrote on his blog. Design job titles, and design roles are not the same thing. Scott says that jobs exist at the organizational level. They're the unit represented in an org chart, which tells you who can fire whom, basically. But most org charts don't tell you how to get the work done. Whereas job roles very much is, talk about the work. They describe an individual's relationship to a bit of work that he's doing. So they exist at the project level, or as part of some sort of a governance or accountability role. Roles are powerful because they can be assigned to teams or to positions or even to other organizations. So I try as hard as I can to talk about job roles. And typically when I do that, especially when we wrote this book, we wanted to whether you're an UX writer, a content designer, a content strategist, or maybe you have a different title, a UX architect or a technical writer or a product designer. The role that we're talking about is doing the writing on a design team. And that can manifest in a few different ways. Here's some just examples from some Adobe products, people on my team. Sometimes they're writing stuff like this, right? Like the tooltips, explaining to people what a tool does and how to access it, right? Like that's one thing. They could be working on infrastructural stuff, right? Like stuff that shows up in the system. Show transform controls up here is like something that somebody wrote. I'm sorry for those of you who use Photoshop. They're often thinking about like structures and nav and taxonomies. They're thinking about like names of panels and tabs. They're thinking about microcopy, right? Like kind of explaining what is happening when you do something. They're thinking about they're sometimes writing learn content. They're focused on other kind of content like assets and libraries. Sometimes the role that we take on are facilitators and wranglers. All of this content was not written by somebody on my team. It was probably written by a product marketing person. And we have to take that and adapt it and wrangle it and bring that into an app to show it in particular context. So that's a role that we take sometimes. Sometimes we're taxonomists and information architects as a role, not as a job title. And we think a lot about segmentation. We think about like how to break up our suite of products and who might use them and what categories those disciplines are. We think about that kind of stuff. Sometimes we collaborate deeply with, specifically at Adobe, we collaborate with our design system team, the Spectrum team, because that's a really good way to scale our impact. We all kind of work centrally on that stuff, but we do have one person, Jess Sattel, who is who embeds full-time on the Spectrum team and is the Spectrum kind of resident content strategist. What kind of stuff do we do there? We have things like this. I talked about this a little bit earlier. It's our style guide at Adobe. And all of this, by the way, is accessible publicly. If you go to spectrum.adobe.com, you can read a lot of this for yourself. We get into the weeds about what kind of punctuation we should use, right? Like how to use ampersands and how to use brackets and colons and commas and ellipses and all that fun kind of persnickety stuff. We talk about using numbers, how to write numbers, big numbers, small numbers. We talk about how to structure lists and how to use contractions, right? Like, sometimes you can say you'll or we will or isn't or aren't, but you probably don't want to use old-timey contractions like tweren't, whomst among us. Sometimes we talk about like the difference between active and passive voice. This is for designers and developers at Adobe to consume, and people who are designing for Adobe products, like in a platform sense, to consume as well. When you use active voice, when you use passive voice, when you use simple verb tenses, things like that. We're also thinking a lot about terminology. This may be too small for you to really see, but this is a list of words. Ad, an app, an application, an asset, and all these words, and kind of like how we define them and how we use them specifically within our context at Adobe. This requires a lot of auditing and research to put together. We don't add to this list lately. And in fact, this summer we have a full-time terminologist who's going to be coming to work with us, which is going to be a really fun, interesting, challenging venture. Because as you can imagine, Adobe is a big siloed organization with 20,000 people. We're definitely going to have an interesting. I don't want to use the word battle because it's not a fight. We're all on the same side. We're going to have an interesting time trying to establish this practice. Sometimes we write like mid-fidelity things like this guide, right? Like it's writing for onboarding experiences, and this is based very much on a big project that Adobe has taken on in the last couple of years called the First Mile Project. Scott Belsky, our CPO, thinks about this idea of a first mile, right? Like if you can help a user get through like the first part of their journey, you're really going to be able to retain them, because when they see, let's say, Photoshop, just one big scary blank screen, and people are like, "Oh God, now what?" So this is some best practices for how to think about that. I'm writing one currently, writing the first draft of one about how to write for error messages. And then we also try to do as much as we can to get into the design component pages themselves. Like this page for our dialogue page. If you go there, you see stuff about the anatomy of a dialogue box. You see behaviors, and you're going to see like UI kits and things like that. But you're also going to see something like this, content standards. What tone should you take when you're writing dialogues in these different circumstances? How do you structure the different elements of it, the title and the description and the button set, right? Like how do you think about that stuff? And that's the kind of stuff we're doing that takes a lot of our time. So we spend a lot of time working on this central stuff. I don't know if you just saw everything flicker around me, but I'm hoping that I did not lose power. We seem to still be going, so I'm gonna say we're good. We have sorry, that was jarring. So when you think about like the traits of a designer or a UX writer, we have a lot in common, right? Like typically a designer is going to have a visual background, some maybe art school or design school. They're going to be thinking about spatial and interactive experiences. Writers are going to be thinking about come from a writing or communications foundation. They're going to be thinking about like maybe a linguistics background or maybe an informational organizational background like library science. But you know what we all have in common? We're all collaborators. We're all strategists. We're all systems thinkers. We're all try to be good communicators. We try to be empathetic and user centered. We try to be inquisitive, understand business goals, et cetera, et cetera. We have a lot in common. Typically, content designers. By the way, I realize that I probably have a audience of mostly designers here. So I'm going to be speaking a little bit to you as people who are hiring content designers or working with content designers, but I also want to speak to anybody in the room who may be trying to get a job as those two. So I might be switching back and forth a little bit. That to say, typically we come from a variety of backgrounds, from a journalism background as I have, from my marketing or copywriting background, library science, academia, corporate brand communications. I know people who were product designers and program managers and product managers who have made the switch. People are engineers who became UX writers. And then I know a few screenwriters and authors who have done that as well, which is pretty cool. I'm going to end on this, a couple different things. So if you are a hiring manager, by the way, if you have any questions for me, we're gonna jump into that here in a few minutes. So start thinking about some questions I can answer. hiring managers, typically, if you are hiring a content designer, look for candidates who, aren't just thinking about the words when they're presenting, but also thinking about the workflow and the user journey around it, right? People who can articulate the rationale for why they wrote something the way they did is really important. If I've had interviews with like portfolio reviews with people who like have an article in there, and I'm like, oh, hey, this is interesting. Why did you structure it this way? Why did you use these words? And sometimes people are just like, I don't know, I just wrote it that way. That's probably not what we're looking for, right? We want somebody who thinks about their audience and who has made decisions, structural decisions, and can rationalize that. You're going to want to hire people who are strategic and highly collaborative. That should be a given. And really, I want to encourage you to hire people from a non-tech background sometimes too, right? Like there's a huge demand. There's a pretty small pool of candidates. There's a lot of these skills. I learned, I worked at a student newspaper, and I would say 80% of what I do today is something that I learned working at that newspaper. Information architecture, presentation of information, collaboration, distilling of information, etc. So look outside your field. Recruiters, if you have recruiters in the room, like get creative with how you're looking for people. Okay, so switching sides, content designers. Talking to you. So if you're looking for jobs, look for employers that understand that you're not just a copywriter filling holes full of words, right? Like that is crucial. You want to make sure that they understand that you are a designer, that you need access to teams early on in the process before we've even gotten there. You're going to want to look for, and I'm speaking broadly here, organizations that organize their writers with the design team rather than the marketing or the communications team, right? Like if you're a marketing writer or a content strategist in marketing, like that makes sense. Work in the marketing side. If you're thinking a lot about business goals, like work with corporate comms. But generally speaking, the closer you are to the designers, the more impact you can have in your work. So, look for jobs that will org you with the design team. Look for people who can offer you a career path that's parallel to designers. Do you have a path if you wanted to be a manager, to be a principal? Sometimes people are hiring one-off writers. You want to make sure that they're committed to your growth as well. And finally, probably the most important thing, ask about this. Make sure that you're looking for employers that are paying you in parity with designers. At Adobe, we use the same job codes. Content strategists, people on my team are designers. We have the same job code. There are very, very large teams out there, brands in the world. I'm not going to name their names here, but they do not have parity. There's a step or two below designers that they offer writers, and words seem accessible, right? Like everybody can write, which is true, but there's a technical aspect to this kind of writing, and they should make sure that they are paying you the same as designers because you are a designer. So that is what I'm going to end on here. Thank you very much. Couple things to plug, if I may, real quick. One, I have started making a zine that's combining UX writing and poetry. I love zines, love print writing. Go to 404.computer if you want to very cheaply buy one of these zines. I have 2 issues. And then finally, if you want to learn more about the book that I wrote with Michael Metz, check out writingsdesigning.com. So you can get a link to buy our book there. You can sign up for our newsletter. You can, if you're interested in workshops in UX writing fundamentals, either as an individual or as a company, we are available for workshops as well. We've done several of them in the last year or so. So thank you so much. And that is it.
Awesome.
Yay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm like, the other Andy is here. Hello,
Yeah.
everybody. So
Andy, did you see my lights flicker?
No, but I had last week, actually, the microphone fell down and nobody saw it, but it's like an experience that I totally get it. But I do see a spider. Anyway, it's fake. But okay, so Andy, great presentation. It was clear. It was really awesome to learn about just how I really love that chart also that you were referencing that
Yeah.
kind of explains the differences of how different teams brand a writer. We need a writer. So actually, like my experience, I was a senior technical writer at Adobe, but
Hmm.
it was like it might have been more UI UX writing, but it really just depends on the job description, right? Like
Yeah.
what is it,
Yep.
what's inside of there. But what I want and we just have some really silly thank you Andy and Andy. We're still going,
Yay, the Indies.
but you're welcome. Okay. So we have a couple different people in the room that are asking some questions. We have technical writers, a lot of writers, a content marketer looking to break into UX writing and content design. Let's talk about that first. Okay,
Yeah.
so Andrew O'Connor and asked that question. I'm a content marketer interested in shifting to UX writing and content design. How do I get
Yeah.
there?
Yeah. I think that like depending on what company you work at, Andrew, like if there's an opportunity within the company, like you're in a highly visible place. Ooh, cool! You can put that comment up on the screen. You're in a visible place to like work with some of those folks and establish relationships. Um, if you are not, if that opportunity kind of doesn't exist, kind of currently where you are, I would suggest building a portfolio and thinking about like where are there let's just say like multi-channel content marketing campaigns that I've worked on. Like I've worked on something that is a website and a blog post and a guest post and a series of social media posts, and really bring all those into a case study and provide some rationale behind it about like how you took a message or took the thing you're trying to say and just consider different audiences, different segments, different platforms, like different media, and just adapted your message for all that, because that is the systems thinking, right? Like that's the stuff that hiring managers are going to want to know about that you can do. That isn't just, I don't know, I just wrote it that way, right? Like that's the kind of thing they want to know. So, I mean, of course, any opportunity you have to think about a UX focused content campaign, like did you help design an app? Did you think about the UX of the blog that you? I have a friend who worked at InVision on the InVision blog, and he was part of a content marketing team that redesigned the new experience, and he got a UX job doing that. So if you have those opportunities, take them. If you don't, I think there's lots of other ways to show your systems thinking. In other methods, and I think content marketing is absolutely a path to get you there for sure.
Yep. I added this follow-up question, which is kind of a follow-up question. Actually, it could be considered a separate question. So you're lucky, Andrew, because you're in the Andy Club. But anyway,
We'll spend more time on you.
so if transitioning to content design from a content marketing career with some content strategy experience, what would you qualify for? What role would you qualify for? Would you be like a junior or um,
Yeah.
Andy? No one calls me that, but it's who I am today. Welcome,
Okay.
Andy, number 3.
Welcome to the Andy Club.
Yes.
That's a good question, and I'm sure that different companies will, and let's just, I mean, I'll just admit it. I mean, recruiters are going to try to like find ways to bring you in at a lower level because it costs less money and it like provides room for growth. Recruiters lowball people, right? That's kind of how it happens. I would argue that if depending on kind of the level of experience you have in content marketing, the kind of stuff you were working on, there are many, 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 many soft skills. Soft skills I use in quotations because it turns out that the hardest skills of all to like that get you there, right? Like if you have 6 years of content marketing experience going into content design, you have 6 years of experience of aligning stakeholders, of pitching a campaign, of working on some sort of a project-based system, working with metrics. I assume in your job in content marketing, you work a lot with metrics and performance. Those skills are directly transferable, and something that I think absolutely is related. So, maybe you might expect, again, depending on pay scales and salaries, what you might expect, like, maybe a lateral transition at first. I don't think that should make you have to go back to the beginning, past jail and collect $200 or whatever. I can't
You
remember the
deserve
metaphor.
that 200. No,
Yeah, yeah.
I'd like to add actually, if you don't mind,
Please.
I'd like to add
Yeah.
also, Andrew, if you could look at like maybe watch some more UX courses on LinkedIn or learn about UX through Design Career Network. Just study user experience and how designers actually work on projects and design thinking and how they really explain their ideas and their thought process behind the user journey. All that stuff is relevant to what you're doing as a content marketer as well. So,
Yeah.
and that is that I feel like, well, that would translate to UX writing. It's just the UX writing is like usually shorter, right? It's a shorter, more blurby kind of like you write like
Yeah. I mean,
smaller.
the individual pieces are, but it all connects to a large system, right? Like, so if designers are designing a form, right, like that's pretty small and blurry, but it has to connect to kind of the larger system and make sense in the user journey. So for sure, like the little pieces of microcopy are part of a larger whole for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you,
Um,
Andy. Andrew.
Now let's Andy the other Andy. Okay, do we have any more questions adding? I do have a question though. Um, what okay, wait, hold on, wait. We already have the content marketer, screenwriting background here, currently trying to get a role as a UX writer. How does screenwriting translate to UX writing?
That's really interesting. Um, I don't know. I mean, screenwriters think, and playwrights and anybody writing like script type stuff, honestly, novelists, you are thinking a whole lot about journeys, right? Like I took a workshop at the Design and Content Conference in 2015, no, 2016, one of those years. I went to Vancouver, went to the Design and Content Conference and took a really great workshop by a woman named Donna Lightshaw. And her whole, she's written a book. Her workshop is about like, like the hero's journey, right? Like taking that narrative device of like a hero's journey, like like a plot increase and a climax and like a like downfall, and making like lining that up with a product experience, with a user experience. It's user journey building and understanding your audience and understanding like the different sort of like messaging touch points along the way. It's building a narrative and it's understanding voice and tone, right? Like one of the big kind of strategic jobs we have is to think about the voice, the brand voice, and what that means in a product. I have a whole hour-long presentation about voice and tone, and those are really important things that y'all think about when you're writing scripts, right? Like, how does a character sound like a character? What are the attributes it takes on? And on top of that, yeah, just understanding storytelling and narratives, right? Like, I understand that like we're introducing this idea of a paintbrush or something here, and that's going to matter later on, right? Like you're going to be using that paintbrush when you get further into this. It's really like if ever you've played a game, a video game, and it kind of gives you a really great tutorial. Like that shows exactly how like that storytelling technique can apply toward a user interface, which is what those things in games are. They're user interfaces, right? So I think that is absolutely transferable skills, and something. And so my background, I have an English lit degree, and one thing that I did, one thing that I got good at, because you have to, is like comparing and contrasting. So I am your guy to go to when you want to know how this thing is like this thing. I'll help you explain that, provide that rationale. So that is that's a lot about what I think about. So yes, screenwriting for sure plays a lot into this role.
In a world where you're the
Yeah.
one, you have one design,
Bum.
one challenge. I feel like it's a really awesome, like being a producer, kind of thinking about the sound effects and all like the entire experience about what the audience is going through. That's
Yeah.
actually, you make a really
Yeah.
great point. It's just like, it's really just, can you handle the technical, like the more dry tone, or do you have room to play and have
Yeah.
fun? Like it depends on who you're working for, probably.
Depends on that. Like if you're building insurance products and like, somebody is is like just gotten a car wreck and they're trying to report the accident to their insurance company through an app. You'd be like, "Hey there, hope you're having a great day. Welcome to Allstate Insurance." Right?
Yeah.
Like you need to be like, you want to get down to business. You'd be like, I'm what? Give me your information. You're not in a place where you should be getting all these pleasantries and niceties.
So,
So
but it depends on your goal. But no, I do agree. I don't think
yeah,
that I
yeah,
think you have to align with where the audience is at. Well,
yeah,
where your message is at and where the audience is at, unless you're Monty
yeah,
Python or whatever. But
yeah.
okay, yes, we have some really awesome questions coming in. Thank you all. Let
Great.
me scroll up and I'll go to um as a visual. Okay, this is visual designers. Welcome, visual designer. As a
Yeah.
visual designer with some heavy writing responsibilities, how should I approach my writing skills? Awesome,
Ooh.
awesome question.
Well,
Yeah.
what I'm going to say is, read this book, right? There's actually
Wait, hold
another
it up for
really.
longer. Hold it up for longer.
We'll have a
Right.
link.
Is designing
Writing
it
is
will.
designing.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Succinct,
There's
clear, and a well-paced book, according to David Hackett. Highly recommended. Thank you.
There's also another book I would
Gotcha.
recommend.
Yeah.
That is, it's written by Scott Kuby, who I talked about earlier in this presentation, and kind of written completely separate from the idea of ours. He published it a year before. He has a book through a book apart called Writing for Designers. And it is a lot about like how you as a designer, basically. So we kind of wrote our book. Our book is about, writing, is about designing for writers, and his book is writing for designers. It has a lot in there about like how to structure your writing, be it business communication or UX writing, or writing about your job, or writing for Medium, or whatever. I would pick that one up too. It's a really short read. It's like 70 pages. It's one of the book apart briefs.
They write really awesome content.
Yeah,
It's so
yeah,
useful and it's like really easy to
yeah,
digest, and yeah,
yeah,
Mr. Zeldman knows what he's doing. So
yeah, yep. So absolutely pick up that book.
yeah, and then what is there anything else that besides reading those books that a visual designer could I actually like if we go back to like well, I don't know if we can pull this up right now, but your presentation in the beginning of it where you had that example that was
Which example?
without any of this you had an example without any of the the words on the screen. Remember the like you're like it was a second or third slide, like early in the slides.
Okay.
There was no
Um.
words on the screen and you were
Oh
showing
yeah,
like I
yeah.
felt
The
like
DoorDash example.
that was just
Yeah.
so
Yeah. Okay.
smart
I
for
have
that
that. I have that
beginning.
queued up. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, like I think like if you think about like the designs around the words, like you're as a visual designer with heavy writing responsibilities, like if unless you have like some specialists that you're working with already, like you're probably uh second naturing writing a lot of these words, right? Like a lot of these are fully apparent. So some of these words, like you probably don't have to focus that much on. If you are writing words for conversion, right? Like that part that says try free delivery on your first order for the store, you're probably working with like a product marketing team or somebody who can help you
I don't
test
see
those
that
words and
there.
really track them. That is in that second screen, this little like tout here that is promotional.
Oh, I know why,
So
because of
yeah,
this.
yeah.
Yeah, because this is on the screen.
Oh, I
Oh,
see. Yeah.
yeah, but it's
And
fine. Yeah.
yeah, and then on the bottom of that first screen, maybe you're going to be working with your brand design or your studio team, your creative studio team. So yeah, just like collaborate a lot with the writers in your organization, even if they're not UX writers, right? Like they're going to really be able to kind of like help you make sure you're using the right words, and for sure if you're a visual designer, like make sure they're getting the context they need for this stuff as well,
But
right?
here's
Like they
here's a
understand your
question.
experience. Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to.
No.
I'm like, but okay,
Go
so
on.
there's a
Yeah.
lot of examples where maybe this person is working at a startup and they don't have writers on their team and they're just kind of filling in for a bunch of different responsibilities.
Yeah.
How do they measure how like to improve or how where do they go to improve their
Yeah.
writing skills? We'll check out your book.
There's the book. There's a few really good places that offer UX writing training, right? Like we do Michael and I do a workshop independently. We have one coming up in April. It's actually in the evening Pacific times to accommodate daytime people in like Singapore and Asia. But there's a place called the UX Writing Collective, UX Writers Collective, which they offer all sorts of training. They're a really good bunch of folks. Yeah, so there's places you can go if you want to like generally improve your writing. Like find a group, like a writing group around where that meet virtually or in real life and critique each other's work. Sometimes you have creative writers in there. Sometimes you have bloggers. But if you're looking specifically to improve like UX writing skills, check out something like the UX Writers Collective or the Writing is Designing workshop. There's a really good conference in the fall called Button. It's put on by the same people who produce Confab, which is a really great content strategy conference. Buttonconf.com. They're going to have really great topics on UX writing, just from all over the board.
Awesome. And also there's always that 3rd grade English grammar book that you can always revisit.
Whip that out.
That's how I actually broke into UX writing from design. Was like going through my old I bought some old textbooks on Amazon and then ended up doing the exercises. But that's just a little part of it though. There's like so much more that you're like that you have to adapt for the job. Okay. And I love this question.
Ayanfe.
How do you pronounce Ayanfe?
Ayanfe. Yep.
Ayanfe asked an awesome question, which is Ayanfe is wondering what the process is like for designing content that will be translated to different languages. How do you approach this?
Yeah. That is a whole topic unto itself, right? Like, I think on one hand, the writing that we're doing on the UX writing end of it needs to be prepared to be translated into localized, right? So at a company like Adobe, we translate into a bunch of different languages, and I need to make sure that I am mostly not using really idiomatic language. Like as a native English speaker, I might say that like, hey, way to knock it out of the park, for like a confirmation message, right? Like, or like a success message. Whereas somebody who doesn't come from a culture that has like a knowledge of baseball, they don't have baseball metaphors like that, that doesn't mean anything to them, right? Like we have an example in the book that was an early Lyft example from 2014. If you had Lyft and after you as a writer got your first 5-star rating from a driver, you got this email, and at the top of the email, it basically is saying like you got a really good score. The headline says, "Could you be any more awesome?" And so for me, as somebody who grew up watching Friends and knowing who Chandler from Friends was and how he says things like that, I understand this to mean, no, I couldn't be any more awesome. I am the awesomest. But actually, a coworker of mine at Facebook who had been in the country for less than a year, been in the US and was not a native English speaker, saw this message and she was like, I don't understand. If I got a perfect score, why is it asking me to be more awesome? And that just is like a light bulb for me. Like, obviously, like they not only like did that particular idiom and way of talking just not like get the message across, it actually meant the opposite of what they were trying to get across to somebody. So making sure that you're using like plain language, conversational language, rather than like idiomatic language, I think is really important. But then also just having meetings and knowing who your localization team is. And this is actually at Adobe the hardest part, right? Like we have all these people, like the localization team, or all the people directly doing translating. There's often like subcontractors of subcontractors of subcontractors, and I just don't have a good way to get information to them, which seems bananas. I should be able to do that kind of thing. But providing context around like terminology that you're using, or understanding that sometimes they don't actually get to translate from screenshots. They have a spreadsheet full of text strings and they don't like really understand what they're translating. So if you have a save button, sometimes they don't know what the object of that is. Is it save file? Is it save your journey? Is it save something else? So providing some sort of like an alternate list, like a alt text or something that has that context is really important. So that's just some tips to begin doing that. As designers, I know you all are often thinking, like visual designers, you're thinking about making sure to leave horizontal space for text, right? Like if you're going to translate something into German, it's typically 30% longer than English text. So you want to make sure that you're not truncating things. Adobe, by the way, is really bad about that. We're getting better, but sometimes that's the case. So so many other nuances and things to think about when you are writing for translation, but that's kind of the basics.
You actually gave me that tip when I was working on the localization project. I had to
That's right. I
translate
remember that.
115. I had to design 115 pages, which is it was like 15 different pages in 7 different languages. And when
Yeah.
you do that much translation, you learn about like character space and how the different languages take up, they look completely different. And also
Yeah.
the way they translate it, it's like always really important to work with somebody who actually speaks that language to make sure that it makes sense and have them take a look at it after you
Yeah.
format everything. But
Yeah.
I felt like your tip about the width of the characters, it changes so much with the
It's a good
language.
rule of thumb. Yeah.
So
Yeah. Anytime possible, involve your users in the building process, right? Like interview people who natively speak the languages that you're trying to translate to and get feedback, right? Like that's so important.
yeah, and then it's funny because Daniel Gaines is saying that they use a software to translate it, and however, I think that because like during my experience, we actually used like a quick, I'm not going to say the company, but it wasn't. We hired like a third party company to do the translations, and a lot of them were incorrect when we shared them with speak like people who spoke that local language.
Yeah.
And it's not, I mean, I wouldn't depend on the software for it. And once in a while it's okay, but you just, especially a large organization like Adobe, you have to be like super mindful. But
Yeah.
anyway, I'm like chiming in, but I'm like, okay, this is Andy hour, other Andy hour. Okay, let's look through. I actually have a light question here, which
Yeah.
is from Herman Belmer.
Ooh,
I'm
controversial.
generally a pencil hater. Go Team Pen. Is there a pencil I
Report
should try?
abuse. Report abuse.
that,
Um,
that would change my
yeah. I have 2 recommendations for you. One that I think would probably do kind of get you to come around on pencils. Check out blackwing602.com.
Blackwing
A
602.
Blackwing pencil is oh boy, I have one right here somewhere. This is a Blackwing. You can tell it's fancy. That
Oh,
like the ferrule on the end of it kind of looks like a paintbrush. Fantastic pencil. This like writing with an Office Depot pencil is like driving a not even a Ford Focus, like a really cheap bad car. Writing with this is like driving a Lexus, right? Like it's also price wise, it's like $2.50
like this?
per pencil, like that exactly. Designers are very big into Blackwing pencils. I found. I actually used to work at the company that makes the Blackwing pencils. Check those out. That's really good. If you want a kind of an offbeat pencil that is not quite that expensive, there's a company called Musgrave, and they're one of the last remaining American pencil companies, and they make a really weird pencil called a Test Scoring 100. If you go
Must.
to I think musgravepencils.com, and this
Designers
is a
take
pencil.
note because
Yeah,
it's
this
good
is
for
a
sketching too. Yeah.
yeah. This is a pencil that is made for filling in the little bubbles on a standardized testing sheet, and it is very smooth. It has really good point retention. Yeah, it's a very good pencil. And if you want more, shameless plug, listen to the Erasable podcast. We are 160 episodes in. It's been 7 years ago, earlier this week. It is about pencils and paper, and stationery,
I love
sometimes
it.
pens, but mostly pencils.
The art of writing,
Yeah.
of the craft of writing. Okay. Now we have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions. And David Hackett, he says, the anecdote reminds me of watching Friends with my Ukrainian friend back in 1989. Yeah, the same reaction to the colloquialisms. I can't say that
That's
word
a
right
hard word to say. Yeah.
colloquialisms. Oh gosh.
Yeah.
But um okay, and then let's talk. Okay, so how about I'd like to rewind back to the soft skill talk that you brought up. Let me hide Herman
Yeah, get
Belmer.
that out of here. Just kidding, Herman.
I
We'll
might know that person.
we'll
It's not
turn you
me.
around.
Yeah. Um, yeah. Let's rewind back to the soft skills about, like, say somebody is coming in for an interview. What is it about their personality that you would look for, and maybe their experience that you would make you more interested in possibly hiring them?
Yeah. I think the thing that I'm looking for the most would be somebody who has a proven writing foundation, right? Like something to show that they are capable and good at writing and thinking about the nuance of words. But then taking that and building off that, and somebody who, um, some people call it design thinking. I would more broadly categorize that as systems thinking. Somebody who can see how this word here affects things happening downstream, and how something that's happening upstream affects that word, and how these words sort of in the same screen are related to each other, and how these words here might conflict with each other. Like, they're not just thinking about like individual messaging components, they're thinking about the system. And that's kind of like the biggest thing that I look for. And then of course people who are highly collaborative and are pretty good at communication. Not saying you have to be an extrovert. You just have to understand how to rationalize what you're saying, and how to talk to stakeholders. I know when I got my job at Adobe, my manager tells me it's because when he was talking to me, interviewing me about voice and tone, I went up to the whiteboard and I sort of like sketched out a kind of a similar uh, four square axes, like that Scott Kuby thing. I kind of like plotted out how voice and tone, how tones should be chosen against the voice, things like that. And he said that he was expecting kind of a fuzzy conversation about like funness and colorfulness and things like that. And I was kind of like giving him a framework. So anything you can do like that too is like really, I think, showing that you're thinking strategically about it.
That's awesome, and more technically too as well.
Yeah. Yep.
That's really, I love that story.
Yeah.
Um, okay, and I'm like, I know we had one more question that I skipped over on here. Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, so how would you present a case study to showcase your work in UX writing?
Um, I mean, I think there's a bunch of different ways it could go. But I would say generally, like, to me, a portfolio should be right, have two pieces, right? Like, one of them is the screenshots, and the like that can be the final product. That could be like this big spreadsheet that you're tracking things in. That could be a picture of a card sort that you've done. Maybe a combination of all the above. If it's something you were able to kind of like follow through. Um, and some of it should be the work, and some of it should be the rationale, right? Like I think especially among a lot of designer portfolios, people really want designs to speak for themselves, right? Like, hey, look at this beautiful functional thing I did. But I think design hiring managers will tell you that they want to know the process. They want to know like how the sausage is made and how you think and how you work on that stuff. So same thing with UX writing portfolios. Talk about like why you made certain word choices. Talk about how you collaborated with your designer to come up with what you did. Talk about how you worked with your central team, if that exists, on incorporating existing voice and tone principles and style and documentation. Talk about how you user tested it and like A/B tested and was able to understand that these words compared to these words got you a 12% lift, and why you think that is, right? Like that kind of stuff. Any details like that are really good. I I can't post them in the comments, but I will. I wrote a blog post for the UX Writing Collective. Writers Collective about UX writing portfolios and some tips for that. Andy, I'm going to post that in our little like private
Oh,
chat channel here, and
that's
if you
great.
want to post that in the comments,
I'll post it in the
um,
show notes as well. And then
yeah,
just
oh,
to
cool,
follow up with that, because like this
yeah.
is actually something that was a discussion on Twitter the other day. How do you like, if you're not a designer, do you need to actually like design a portfolio that looks that will like, who is your audience? Are you
Yeah.
what are you
I
trying to make a more visual presentation out of your writing, or can you just explain it with words?
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to discount the idea that you need to have like a clear, like compelling design, right? Like oftentimes design, like visual design people are hiring like writing design people, and they're more finely attuned to something that looks, very like very crisp and clean and like powerful. But I honestly, I don't think you need to go like out of your way to have some sort of a very pixel perfect design, right? I think that you need to like have something compelling, and I mean, I'm not going to lie, like your skills in visual design are useful and required. Like, you are in UX, so you should understand like the principles of those designs, of that style of design. So I mean, there's plenty of really good Google Slides templates that would work just fine. There's, like my portfolios and my slide decks tend to be, one or two colors with just a few weights of a font. Like I'm trying to follow like design principles as I go. If your portfolio just looks like crap, but it's like, compelling when it comes to words, like people might not look at it. That's the sad fact of how portfolios are typically get reviewed. So I would absolutely pay attention to the design of it, but I don't think you need to go over the top. I think the more important thing is to really emphasize the words and to have a clear hierarchy, right? Like I should be focusing on like these words and then these words and then these, right? Like having a information architecture is kind of the meta challenge, right? Like you're telling a story, you have a structure, you're trying to convince hiring managers that that's the case. So your portfolio really should reflect that too.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Presentation matters. Yeah.
Yeah. And real quick, I'll also say to me, it doesn't matter if it's a page on your website or if it's in a special like Squarespace portfolio or if it's a slide deck or if it's a PDF, whatever. Like to me, that doesn't, matter that much, as long as it's something that I can parse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or Webflow, just
Yeah. Webflow.
using a template as like, you don't need to design it yourself, just use a
Yeah.
template. Sounds like you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay. And did you want to add anything else before we close the door for the evening?
Yeah. If you want tweets about good and bad writing and zines and San Francisco and pencils, come follow me on Twitter at A Welfle.
Oh yeah, wait, hold on. I gotta add your at A Welfle, right?
Yeah. WELFFLE.
Yeah. Here we go.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah.
Follow me. Oh, no, I'm gonna add myself to you though. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Follow Andy Galpern.
It's no, just at Design Career Net there. It doesn't matter about me. There you go. Design Career Net, but follow Andy. That's who matters right now. The Andy, the world of Andy, the only world of Andy. I'm being so silly. I'm having a lot of fun. Thank you so much. This is a really, really helpful. How much do you think UX designers really? Well, can we take one more question, you think?
Yeah.
Or okay. Yeah, because you're here and you're awesome. One more. And let's include the link about the article about the portfolio. Okay.
Yeah. How much do you think
Yeah, you got it.
How much do you think UX designers realize how important good writing is to the overall UX? Good question. I like to think that the work that I'm doing and the message that I have is like helping. And I think increasingly, not just because of this, but because of just a shift in getting back to fundamentals and basics. I think that people are learning that. I think it's growing. Absolutely. I think that there's probably some people who don't really think it's important. But generally, I think people pretty realize it's important. They just maybe don't realize either how important or how one affects that, right? Like how do you get good words in the UX? It's not just, providing some blanks and telling somebody to fill in the blanks, right? Like it's designers and, UX people prototyping, wireframing, with words early on. There's a really good quote. I'll try to end on this. Steph Hay, who is the head of design at Capital One. She has this really great quote that basically says that words are the lowest risk, lowest cost way to design, to prototype. wireframe. So if you're including, if you're thinking about like big nav structure items and like key actions and terms early on, when words are still really malleable, you're going to solve a lot of problems later. When you're like trying to retrofit words that have already been baked through the system and are being used by your executives and like that kind of stuff. So that's something to take to heart. Like include a writer at every step of the design process, and the better the words will be. Final word.
Is that? Oh wait, hold on. Sorry. Final word.
Final word.
Okay, I think that's it.
Yeah.
And no, we
Thanks,
need
Rich.
to
Good
bring
question.
you guys. Yeah, that's awesome question. Thank you all for participating today, and thank you,
thanks for
Andy,
coming.
for coming and sharing your knowledge and teaching us about the world of UX, content strategy, content design, content writing, technical writing, product writing,
all that stuff,
whatever you want to call it. This is really, really informative. We'll have any resources that y'all requested in the show notes. You can scan through the presentation, or somebody asked about if they could view the presentation later.
Sure. Yeah. I'll make sure you have a link to a PDF.
Yeah, we'll link to that in the show notes as well. And next week, I believe we have an event for managers. We're going live on YouTube with David Huang. I don't know if I say his name correctly. Hoang.
David from
David,
Webflow.
David he's a director of design from Webflow. He is full of so much awesome information, and he's going to talk about how to go from, being a designer to like growing into a manager, and how to get a job as a UX manager. Because this is basically Design Career Network. Our role is to target like anybody who works on a design team. I know it's broad, but it's I don't know. I guess it's what I'm interested in, so that's why it happens. But regardless, it's really we really want to help fulfill like designers' careers and make sure that you're getting the resources and the information you need to succeed. So if there's anything that you would like to learn about, you can ask me on either Twitter at Andy Galpern, or email me, andy@designcareer.org. You can also view our upcoming schedule at designcareer.org, where we have a list of all of our upcoming talks about how, we're going to go into detail with a recruiter from LinkedIn talking about how to fill out your LinkedIn profile as a product designer and common do's and don'ts. And we're going to go into more details about like interviewing techniques and such. So join us next week. Subscribe to us. Thank you, Andy, so much, and have a great night. This is Andy Candy and Andy Welfle signing off.
The Andy signing off.
Peace out. Bye-bye.